Real-life horror stories that will haunt your every move. Be advised, it's so terrifying that 90% of people couldn't last more than 30 minutes before shutting it off. Consider this your only warning.
The Demon That Eats Human Bones. Part 1. Black Hollow was the kind of town most people forgot existed. It sat between endless farmland and a stretch of dense forest that locals simply called the Deep Woods. The town had one gas station, 2 bars, a small grocery store, and a church that rang its bell every Sunday morning, whether anyone showed up or not. For decades, nothing truly strange had ever happened there, until the disappearances began. The first person to vanish was Victor Hale. Victor was a mechanic who lived alone at the edge of town. Everyone knew him as a quiet man who spent most of his evenings drinking at Parker's Bar before driving home down the old forest road. One night, Victor left the bar just after midnight. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. 3 days later, a hunter named Daniel Cross found the body. Daniel had been tracking a wounded deer deeper into the forest than he normally went. The air had been strangely silent that morning. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of leaves under his boots. Then he saw something pale between the trees. At first, Daniel thought it was a discarded mannequin, but when he stepped closer, he realized it was Victor. The body was lying on its side in the dirt. Victor's skin looked perfectly normal. There were no cuts, no bite marks, no blood. Yet something about the body was horribly wrong. It looked collapsed, like a deflated balloon. Daniel nudged the arm with his boot. The arm bent in the middle. Not at the elbow, in the middle. Daniel stumbled backward, his stomach twisting. There were no bones. Inside Victor Hale's body, every bone had been removed. The police arrived within an hour. Sheriff Martin Alvarez had been running the Black Hollow Police Department for almost 20 years, and in all that time he had never seen anything like this. Victor's body was carefully placed onto a stretcher. When the paramedics lifted him, the body sagged in a way that made everyone look away. It was like lifting a sack of wet cloth. Dr. Ellen Ward, the town's medical examiner, performed the autopsy that night. She called the sheriff 2 hours later. Her voice sounded shaken. "Martin, you need to come here." Sheriff Alvarez arrived at the morgue just before dawn. Dr. Ward stood beside the metal examination table, staring down at Victor's body. "You said every bone was gone," the sheriff said. "Yes," she replied quietly. "And?" She hesitated. "And what?"
She looked at him with pale, tired eyes. "There are no surgical marks, no cuts, no fractures." The sheriff frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "I know." Dr. Ward swallowed. "It's like they were removed without opening the body." The sheriff stared at the corpse. "That's impossible." Dr. Ward nodded slowly. "I agree." Neither of them spoke for a long time. The story should have ended there. One unexplained death in a quiet town. But 2 weeks later, another person disappeared. Then another. Then another. All of them vanished after midnight, and every single one was eventually found inside the forest, collapsed, empty, boneless. The town of Black Hollow began to change. People stopped going out at night. Bars closed early. Parents refused to let their children walk home after dark. The sheriff increased patrols, but it didn't help. Whoever or whatever was responsible left no tracks, no witnesses, no evidence, only bodies. The 4th victim was a college student named Ryan Mercer. Ryan had been visiting his parents for the weekend. He went for a walk after dinner and never came back. His body was discovered 5 days later. Again in the forest. Again completely boneless. But this time, something else was found. A symbol carved into a nearby tree. It looked ancient. A twisted circle filled with jagged lines. Sheriff Alvarez photographed the symbol and brought the image to the town library the next morning. That was where he met Margaret Doyle. Margaret was nearly 80 years old and had spent most of her life studying local history. When she saw the photograph, her face drained of pallor. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. "In the forest," the sheriff said, "near one of the bodies." Margaret closed the book she had been reading. "You shouldn't have gone looking," she said quietly. The sheriff frowned. Looking for what? Margaret hesitated. Then she said the word no one in town had spoken in generations. A bone demon. The sheriff stared at her. A what? Margaret slowly stood from her chair and walked toward a dusty shelf in the back of the library. She pulled down a leather-bound book that looked older than the town itself. Inside were yellowed pages filled with sketches and handwritten notes. She turned to a page showing a crude drawing of a tall skeletal creature. Long limbs, a narrow head, a mouth filled with needle-like teeth.
And beneath the drawing were 4 words written in faded ink. The one who eats bones. Margaret tapped the page. My grandmother used to tell stories about this thing, she said. The sheriff crossed his arms. You're telling me a monster is responsible for the murders? Margaret didn't smile. This town was built on land people feared for centuries. She pointed to another page. Settlers wrote about bodies found in the forest, exactly like the ones you were seeing now. The sheriff felt a chill run down his spine. And what happened to it? Margaret slowly turned another page. A drawing showed a group of men standing around a large wooden cage buried underground. They trapped it, she said. Sheriff Alvarez leaned closer. How? Margaret pointed to the symbol carved in the tree. With that, the sheriff's stomach tightened. And where did they trap it? Margaret looked toward the forest visible through the library window. Somewhere deep in those woods. The sheriff looked at the photograph again. Then he asked the question that had suddenly become impossible to ignore. If they trapped it, how is it killing people now? Margaret's answer came slowly. Because someone must have opened the cage. That night, Sheriff Alvarez couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the bodies, about the symbol, about the creature in the drawings. Around 2:30 a.m., the phone rang. He answered immediately. It was one of his deputies. Sheriff, we've got another one. The sheriff sat upright. Where? The deputy's voice trembled. In the forest. Sheriff Alvarez grabbed his coat and keys. Stay there, I'm coming. 20 minutes later, he arrived at the scene. Flashlights illuminated another body lying among the trees. But something about this scene felt different. The forest was completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Sheriff Alvarez walked toward the corpse, and then he saw something in the dirt. Footprints. But they weren't human. They were long, thin, and shaped like the bones of a hand. The sheriff slowly looked up. Beyond the flashlight beams, deeper in the forest, something tall was standing between the trees. Watching them, it didn't move. It didn't breathe. It simply stood there in the darkness. And then the sheriff realized something that made his blood run cold. The thing wasn't standing. It was hanging from the branches, upside down, like a spider, and its long, skeletal fingers were gripping the trunk of the tree. For a moment, no one spoke. No one moved. Then the creature tilted its head and began to crawl down toward them.
Part 2. When the sun finally rose over Black Ridge, the town looked normal again. Too normal. Morning light spilled across the empty streets, touching the quiet houses and silent storefronts as if nothing had happened during the night. Birds sang from telephone wires. A few early trucks rumbled down the highway. But beneath that calm surface, fear was spreading. By noon, everyone in town had heard the news. Another body had been found in the forest. And like all the others before it, the bones were gone. The victim this time was a teenage boy named Aaron Wells. He had gone missing 3 nights earlier. His friends said he had been walking home from a party near the edge of town. The road he took ran beside the forest, an old dirt path locals avoided after dark. Search teams had looked for him the next day. They found nothing, until this morning. A pair of hunters discovered his body lying deep among the trees, half hidden beneath fallen leaves. At first glance, it looked like Aaron was simply sleeping. His clothes were intact, his skin showed no wounds, his face looked peaceful. But when the police tried to move him, his body collapsed, like a sack filled with water, because inside, there was nothing holding him up. Every bone in his body had vanished. Daniel arrived at the sheriff's office just after noon. A small crowd had gathered outside the building. People stood in tight groups, whispering nervously. Everyone looked afraid. Everyone looked tired. The disappearances had been happening for months now. First, it was animals, dogs, livestock, wild deer found deep in the woods, all discovered in the same condition. No blood, no visible injuries, just hollow bodies with no bones inside. Then the people started disappearing. 5 victims so far. Aaron made 6. Sheriff Dalton stood near the entrance when Daniel approached. The older man looked like he hadn't slept in days. "You shouldn't be here," Dalton said quietly. Daniel crossed his arms. "I told you I'm investigating this." Dalton sighed. "You're a journalist, not a cop. I'm someone who's willing to ask questions." The sheriff rubbed his temples. "People are already scared enough. And pretending this is normal is helping?" Dalton didn't answer, because deep down, he knew Daniel was right. Inside the building, the smell of coffee and cigarette smoke filled the air. The body had already been taken to the medical examiner's office in the next town.
But the photographs remained. Daniel studied them carefully. Every victim looked the same. No cuts, no broken skin, no blood. Just emptiness. It didn't make sense. Bones couldn't simply disappear, not without tearing flesh apart, not without leaving damage. And yet, the bodies were perfectly intact. Daniel flipped through the case files. The first victim had been reported 4 months ago, a hunter named Marcus Hill. His body had been discovered about 2 miles into the forest. At the time, the town assumed it was some kind of animal attack, but animals didn't remove bones without touching flesh. Then 2 weeks later, another body appeared, then another, and another, each one deeper inside the forest, each one hollow. "There's something else," the voice came from behind him. Daniel turned to see a young deputy standing near the door. Her name was Clara Jennings. She had been quiet during most of the investigation, but now she looked nervous. "What is it?" Daniel asked. Clara hesitated. Then she said quietly, "The bodies are always found in the same area." Daniel leaned forward. "What area?" She slid a map across the desk. Her finger pointed to a circle drawn deep inside the forest, an area locals called Bone Hollow. The name alone made Daniel uneasy. "Why is it called that?" he asked. Clara swallowed. "Old stories." "What kind of stories?" She hesitated again. Then she said the words very carefully. "Stories about something that lives under the forest." Sheriff Dalton slammed the door open at that exact moment. "That's enough," he snapped. Clara immediately stepped back. Dalton glared at Daniel. "I told you before, no ghost stories." Daniel folded his arms. "You're saying there's a logical explanation for bodies with no bones?" Dalton didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed the map and shoved it into a drawer. "We're done here." But Daniel had already memorized the location. Bone Hollow, deep in the center of the forest, exactly where the old woman had told him not to go. That evening, Daniel packed his gear: camera, flashlight, voice recorder. He also brought something else, a small pistol. He wasn't sure if it would help, but it made him feel slightly less helpless. The road into the forest was narrow and overgrown. Few people traveled this far anymore. Trees closed overhead like a tunnel of shadows. The deeper Daniel drove, the quieter the world became. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just silence. After an hour, the dirt road ended. Daniel parked the truck and stepped outside. The forest smelled damp and ancient. Moonlight barely reached the ground through the thick canopy. He checked the map again. Bone Hollow was another mile deeper, on foot. The walk felt longer than expected. Branches snapped beneath his boots. The darkness between trees seemed almost solid. Several times, Daniel thought he heard something moving nearby, but every time he stopped, the forest fell completely silent again. Then he reached the clearing, Bone Hollow. The place looked wrong. The ground dipped slightly into a shallow bowl surrounded by ancient trees, and scattered across the dirt were bones, hundreds of them, animal bones, deer skulls, bird skeletons, even what looked like human ribs, all of them picked clean, all of them broken open. Daniel felt his stomach tighten.
He raised his camera and took several pictures. Flash, flash, flash. Each burst of light revealed more bones hidden in the darkness. Then something moved. Daniel froze. At the far edge of the clearing, a shape stood between the trees. Tall, thin, almost human, but something about its posture felt horribly wrong. Its arms were too long, its head tilted sideways, like it was studying him. Daniel's heart began pounding. "Hello?" he called cautiously. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. It simply stood there, watching. Then the ground beneath Daniel's feet shifted slightly. A faint vibration, like something massive moving underground. Slowly, directly toward him. Daniel's blood ran cold, because suddenly, he understood something. The thing standing in the trees might not be the demon. It might just be one of them. And beneath the soil of Bone Hollow, something far larger was beginning to wake up.
Part 3. The next morning, the town looked normal again. Sunlight covered the streets, children rode their bicycles past the grocery store, old men sat outside the cafe drinking coffee like nothing had happened. But everyone knew something had changed. No one spoke about it. At the police station, the officer who had opened the body bag the night before hadn't said a single word since. He just sat behind his desk staring at his hands, because he had touched the body and he knew what it felt like. It felt like a sack filled with wet meat. No bones, no structure, just skin and flesh collapsing inward. The medical examiner later confirmed it. Every bone in the victim's body was gone. Skull, ribs, spine, arms, legs, everything. But there were no cuts, no surgical marks, no broken skin. It was as if the bones had simply vanished from inside the body. That afternoon, the mayor called an emergency town meeting. Everyone gathered inside the small church near the center of town, the same church where people used to pray every Sunday. Now the building was filled with whispers. Fear moved through the room like cold air. An old man finally stood up from the back row. His name was Mr. Calder. He had lived in the town longer than anyone else, and when he spoke, the room became completely silent. He said something that made several people leave the church immediately, because he said this had happened before, 40 years ago. Back then, people also disappeared. Bodies were found in the forest, empty inside, just like now. But the townspeople had learned something terrible. The thing in the forest didn't kill people randomly. It hunted, slowly, patiently, and once it noticed someone, it never stopped coming for them. Mr. Calder then looked around the room. His eyes stopped on one person, me. A cold silence fell over the church. I felt every person in that room turn to look at me. Mr. Calder pointed a shaking finger in my direction and said something that made my stomach drop. "You were in the forest last night, weren't you?" My heart started pounding because he was right, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what he said next. "If you heard the bones cracking," his voice trembled, "then it already knows you." At that moment, the church lights flickered, just once, and from somewhere outside, deep in the direction of the forest, a long, slow cracking sound echoed through the town.
Like something massive. Bending bones. To be continued.
Part 4. The cracking sound from the direction of the forest didn't last long. Maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3. But everyone in the church heard it. The noise echoed through the open windows like dry branches snapping deep in the woods. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the whispers started. Some people stood up immediately and rushed toward the exit. Others stayed frozen in their seats, staring toward the dark tree line beyond the road. Mr. Calder slowly lowered his hand, but his eyes never left me. "You shouldn't have gone there," he said quietly. The room suddenly felt smaller, colder. I forced myself to speak. What exactly is in that forest? Mr. Calder didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned toward the mayor. The mayor looked uncomfortable, like someone who had hoped this conversation would never happen again. But the silence inside the church demanded answers. Finally, Mr. Calder spoke. "It's not one demon," he said. "It's something older." A few people gasped quietly. The sheriff stepped forward. "That's enough," he said firmly. "We're not spreading panic." But the damage had already been done. Because people in this town already believed the stories, they just didn't want to say them out loud. Until now. The meeting ended early. People left the church in small groups, walking quickly back toward their homes. No one wanted to stay outside longer than necessary. As the crowd thinned, I stepped outside into the evening air. The sky was already turning dark. Black Hollow didn't have many streetlights, and the ones it did have flickered constantly. Across the road, the forest stood like a wall of darkness, silent, watching. Sheriff Dalton came out of the church behind me. "You're not helping," he said. "I'm asking questions. You're stirring up fear." I turned toward him. 6 people are dead." His jaw tightened. "I know exactly how many people are dead." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that had been building in my mind all day. What happened 40 years ago? Dalton sighed. "You really want to know?" "Yes." He looked toward the forest. Then he said something that made the air feel even colder. 40 years ago, they tried to kill it. We walked toward the sheriff's truck. Dalton unlocked the door but didn't get in right away. Instead, he leaned against the side of the vehicle and stared down the road. "My father was sheriff before me," he said.
He told me the story once. His voice was low now, almost reluctant. Back then, bodies started appearing just like they are now. Boneless? Dalton nodded. At first, they blamed animals, then cults, then serial killers. But nothing made sense. He paused, until someone found the cave. A chill ran through my chest. What cave? Dalton looked back toward the forest again, deep under Bone Hollow. According to Dalton's father, a group of hunters discovered the cave entrance after noticing strange sinkholes forming in the forest. The hole led deep underground, deeper than anyone expected. At first, they thought it was just another abandoned mine. Then they started finding bones, thousands of them. Animal bones, human bones, all cracked open, all hollow, like something had sucked the marrow out. But the worst part wasn't the bones. It was the tunnel, because the deeper they went, the larger it became, as if something enormous had been living there. Something that moved through the earth like a worm. Something that hunted at night. Dalton rubbed his face. My father said they heard it before they saw it. Heard what? The bones breaking. My stomach tightened. What did it look like? Dalton shook his head slowly. No one really knows. But one of the hunters survived long enough to describe it. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. He said it was tall. Too tall. Skin stretched tight over a body made of bones that didn't belong to it. My skin crawled. Bones that didn't belong to it? Dalton nodded. He said the creature collected bones, human bones, and used them to build itself. The wind shifted slightly. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped. Both of us turned toward the sound, but the road behind us was empty. Dalton opened the truck door. "You should leave town," he said, "before night." "You really believe that thing is real?" Dalton didn't hesitate. "Yes. That night I stayed in the motel near the highway. I told myself it was just another investigation, another strange town story. But something about Black Hollow felt different. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like the forest itself was breathing. Around midnight, the power went out. The motel room went completely dark. Outside, the town fell silent. No cars, no voices, no wind. Then I heard something,
A faint sound coming from outside my door. Slow, careful.
I held my breath. The sound stopped. Then a soft tapping started on the door. 3 taps. Very gentle. Very patient. My heart pounded in my chest. I stepped closer to the door. Who is it? No answer. Just silence. Then, a long scraping sound moved slowly down the hallway, like something with long limbs crawling across the carpet. I waited until the sound faded. Then I slowly opened the door. The hallway lights were still out. Only moonlight from the windows lit the corridor. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed the marks on the carpet. Long, thin, finger-shaped indentations leading down the hallway toward the exit, toward the road that led straight to the forest. And at the far end of the hallway, something tall stood near the door, watching me. Its head slowly tilted. Then it slipped outside into the darkness, leaving only one thing behind on the carpet: a single human bone, still wet.
For a long moment, I simply stood there, staring at the bone on the motel carpet. The hallway was silent again. The tall shape I had seen at the end of the corridor was gone, but the bone was real. Moonlight from the window illuminated it clearly. It was small, thin, and slightly curved. A finger bone, still slick with something dark. My stomach twisted. The creature hadn't just passed through the hallway, it had left something behind, like a message, or a warning, or maybe something worse, an offering. Slowly, I stepped forward and crouched down beside it. The bone looked fresh, too fresh, which meant one thing: someone else in this motel might already be dead. The thought hit me like a punch. I stood up immediately and looked toward the neighboring doors. Room 12, Room 13, Room 14, all closed, all silent. My heart started pounding again. I moved down the hallway carefully, knocking on the nearest door. Hello? No answer. I knocked harder. Still nothing. I grabbed the handle and pushed. The door opened. Inside, the room looked empty. The bed was unmade. The television flickered with static. But the bathroom light was on. I stepped inside slowly. Hello? Still no response. The bathroom door was slightly open, and something about the way it hung there made my skin crawl. I pushed it open. The smell hit me first. A thick, metallic smell, like rust and damp soil. The body lay collapsed beside the sink. A man, his skin intact, his clothes soaked with sweat. But the shape of his body was wrong. His arms bent in strange directions. His chest had sunk inward. And when I moved closer, I saw the terrible truth. His bones were gone, every single one. His body had folded into itself like wet cloth. The demon had already been here, and it had taken what it came for. I stumbled backward out of the room, my mind racing. If the creature had entered the motel, that meant it was no longer hunting only in the forest. It had come into town, which meant no one was safe anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I waited in the chair beside the window with the lights off and my pistol in my hand. Every small sound made my nerves jump. Wind brushing the building, floorboards creaking, the distant hum of a generator somewhere across town. But the creature never returned. At least, not to the motel. Morning arrived slowly. Gray clouds covered the sky.
The entire town felt heavier than usual, like something dark had settled over it during the night. Sheriff Dalton arrived less than an hour after I called. He stood over the body in the motel bathroom with the same expression he had worn at every other crime scene: exhaustion, anger, fear. "It's escalating," I said quietly. Dalton didn't reply. Instead, he looked toward the open window. "You said you saw it." "Yes." "What did it look like?" I hesitated. Then I answered honestly. "Tall. Too tall." Dalton closed his eyes briefly. "God help us," he muttered. By afternoon, the news had spread through Black Hollow. The demon had entered town. People locked their doors. Businesses closed early. Some families packed their cars and left. But not everyone could leave, and the thing hunting bones didn't seem interested in letting the town empty so easily. That evening, Mr. Calder came to find me. He arrived at the motel just before sunset. His face looked pale, more frightened than before. "You saw it?" I nodded. Calder sat down slowly. "I hoped it was just a story coming back," he whispered. "But now I know." "Know what?" He looked toward the forest. "It's not just hunting anymore." "Then what is it doing?" Calder's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's feeding." I frowned. "Feeding?" He nodded. 40 years ago, it hunted one person every few weeks. But this time, his hands trembled sadly. "This time it's faster." "Why?" Calder's answer made my chest tighten. "Because it's growing." That night, the town lost power again. Darkness swallowed every street, every house, every road, and somewhere in that darkness, something began moving through Black Hollow. Slow, patient, searching. Around midnight, the first scream echoed across town. Then another, and another. People rushed to their windows. Some tried calling the police. Others hid inside their homes. But the screams kept coming, because the demon had learned something new. It no longer needed the forest. It had brought the hunt directly into town. And somewhere out there in the darkness, bones were breaking again.
Part 6. The first scream ended abruptly, not fading, not trailing off. It simply stopped, as if someone had cut the sound out of the air. For a few seconds afterward, the town of Black Hollow was completely silent. Then another scream exploded somewhere farther down the street. This one lasted longer, long enough for people to hear the terror in it, long enough for the sound to suddenly twist into something worse. A choking noise, a wet snapping sound, and then silence again. Inside the motel room, I sat frozen in the chair beside the window. The pistol in my hand suddenly felt very small, very useless. Outside, the entire town had gone dark after the power failure. The only light came from the pale moon hanging behind thin clouds. Across the road, I saw a house door burst open. A man ran out into the street. He looked around wildly, shouting something I couldn't hear through the glass. Then he started running toward his truck. He never made it. Something moved along the roof of the house behind him. Fast. Too fast. A long shape dropped silently from the edge of the roof. It landed behind him without a sound. For a moment, the man didn't even realize it was there. Then he turned and saw it. Even from across the street, I saw the horror in his face. The creature towered over him. Its body looked wrong, not just tall, but assembled, like a sculpture made from bones of different shapes and sizes forced together beneath thin gray skin. Its arms were too long. Its legs bent backward in places no human joints should exist. And its head was almost human, except for the mouth. The mouth stretched far too wide across its face, and inside it, rows of thin white bones moved like teeth. The man tried to run. The creature moved faster. One of its long arms shot forward and wrapped around his chest. Then came the sound, a deep, crushing crack. The man screamed once,
Then the creature lifted him easily off the ground. The next sound was worse. A long, slow series of pops, like someone snapping dry branches one after another. The man's body began to collapse in the creature's grip. His arms sagged, his legs bent, his torso folded inward. Within seconds, he was nothing but loose skin and flesh hanging in the monster's hands. The creature held the empty body for a moment. Then it opened its mouth, wide, unnaturally wide. Something moved inside its throat.
A cluster of pale shapes shifting beneath the skin. And then, slowly, the bones began sliding out. Not through wounds, not through torn flesh. They emerged through the creature's mouth, one by one. The man's ribs, his arm bones, the curved pieces of his spine, all slick with dark fluid. The creature consumed them greedily, crunching them between rows of jagged bone teeth. The sound carried across the silent street, a horrible grinding noise. I felt my stomach twist violently. The creature finished eating and dropped the empty body onto the pavement. Then it lifted its head and looked directly toward the motel window. Toward me. My heart nearly stopped. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then the creature tilted its head slowly, as if recognizing me, as if remembering. I suddenly understood something terrifying. It wasn't just hunting randomly. It was hunting people who had seen it, people who knew. And now, it knew where I was. The creature took one step toward the motel, then another, its long limbs bending unnaturally with each movement. I raised the pistol, my hands shaking violently. But before it reached the road, something unexpected happened. Headlights suddenly appeared at the end of the street. A truck sped toward town from the highway. The bright beams swept across the buildings, across the street, across the creature. For a brief moment, the monster froze in the light. Then it moved, not toward me, but upward. With terrifying speed, it climbed the side of a nearby building, its long fingers digging into the brick like claws. Within seconds, it disappeared onto the rooftop. The truck roared past a moment later. The driver never saw what had been standing in the street. And when the headlights faded, the creature was gone. But I knew something now. Something worse than before. It wasn't just a demon. It was intelligent. And tonight, it had seen me watching, which meant one thing. The hunt had changed, because the next bones it wanted were mine.
I didn't move for a long time after the creature disappeared. The street outside the motel returned to silence. The man's body still lay in the road, collapsed, empty, the way all the others had been found. My fingers tightened around the pistol, but I already knew the truth. A gun wouldn't stop something like that. The creature hadn't just killed that man, it had harvested him, like a farmer collecting crops. And now it knew exactly where I was. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Panicking wouldn't help. If the demon was intelligent, and it clearly was, then it would come back. Maybe not tonight, but soon. And next time, it would come for me. Before dawn, Sheriff Dalton arrived with 2 deputies. They had heard the screaming too. When they saw the body in the street, none of them spoke for several seconds. Deputy Clara Jennings finally knelt beside it. Her voice trembled. God. Dalton crouched beside her. He had seen bodies like this before, but not this fresh, not this close to town. He stood up slowly and looked at me. You saw it again. I nodded. Dalton rubbed his face tiredly. Then he said something that surprised me. We can't stop it. Clara looked up at him. What? Dalton didn't hesitate.
We don't have the weapons. We don't even know what it is. Clara shook her head. So what do we do? Dalton's answer came quietly. We bury it. That afternoon, Dalton took me back to the library. Margaret Doyle was already waiting. The old woman looked like she had expected this moment for years. You've seen it now, she said calmly. Yes. She nodded slowly. Then you understand. Dalton placed a stack of old documents on the table. These came from the town records, he said. 40 years ago, they didn't kill the demon. Margaret opened one of the yellowed books. No, she said. They trapped it. She turned the pages until she found an old drawing. It showed a deep pit surrounded by wooden beams and iron chains. Inside the pit, a tall skeletal figure struggled violently. Margaret pointed to the drawing. They lured it into a cavern beneath Bone Hollow, with bait. My stomach tightened. What kind of bait? Margaret looked directly at me. People. The room fell silent. Dalton continued. Once it entered the cavern, they collapsed the entrance. Then they sealed it with iron and stone. I frowned. Then how did it escape? Margaret closed the book slowly. It didn't.
Dalton and I both looked at her. What do you mean? I asked. Margaret's voice became very quiet. The creature you saw isn't the original demon. A cold chill spread through my chest. What? Margaret slid another drawing across the table. This one showed something even worse. The demon standing in a pile of bones. But there was something strange about its body. The bones forming its shape were different sizes, different ages, different shapes. She topped the drawing. That thing builds itself. With the bones it eats. Dalton's eyes widened. You're saying... Margaret finished the sentence. The more bones it consumes, the larger it becomes. My mind raced. That means... Yes, she interrupted. It's still growing. Dalton slammed his fist on the table. Then we collapsed the cave again. Margaret shook her head. The cave collapsed decades ago. So, where is the original demon? Margaret looked toward the forest again. Still buried. Still alive. A heavy silence filled the room. Then the terrible realization hit me. If the original demon is still trapped, then what is the one outside? Margaret's voice barely rose above a whisper. A child. The room went cold. A child, Dalton repeated. Margaret nodded. The original creature must have reproduced before it was trapped. And this, she pointed toward the forest, is what it left behind. My stomach twisted. How big will it get? Margaret didn't answer right away. Then she said something that made the air feel heavy. As big as the bones allow. That night, the town was quieter than ever. Many families had already left. But some people stayed, because they had nowhere else to go. And somewhere out in the darkness beyond Black Hollow, the creature was hunting again, because it wasn't finished growing, not even close. And deep beneath Bone Hollow, something much larger stirred in the earth. Something ancient, something hungry, because every bone its child consumed was feeding it too.
Part 8. No one in Black Hollow slept that night. Even the people who had stayed inside their homes with locked doors and covered windows could feel something moving in the darkness beyond the town. Not just one thing, but two. The younger demon moved through the streets like a hunter, silent, careful, listening. The older one, the one buried beneath Bone Hollow, moved differently. The ground itself trembled sometimes, very slightly, just enough that glasses rattled on tables and picture frames shifted on the walls. Most people told themselves it was just nerves, just fear. But the truth was much worse. Something enormous was waking up under the forest. Sheriff Dalton gathered the remaining deputies at the station shortly after sunset. The building was nearly empty now. Half the town had fled during the day. Cars packed with families had streamed down the highway for hours. But the creature didn't follow them. It stayed, because something about Black Hollow mattered, something buried beneath it. Dalton spread the old maps across his desk. Margaret stood beside him, her hands resting on the table. "This is where the cave used to be," Dalton said, pointing to the center of Bone Hollow. 40 years ago, they sealed it completely. Margaret nodded. With iron chains, with stone, with fire.
You mean like a ritual? Margaret didn't smile. You can call it that. Dalton straightened. So we draw the circle again. Yes. And then what? Margaret's answer came quietly. Then we lure it inside. The plan was simple and terrifying. They would recreate the old symbol at the center of Bone Hollow, a large circle carved into the earth using salt, iron dust, and old ritual markings described in the town records. Once the creature stepped inside, it would weaken, slow down, enough for them to collapse the ground beneath it, burying it again, just like the first demon. Maybe forever, maybe not, but long enough to save the town. By midnight, the circle was finished. It stretched nearly 20 feet across the clearing. White salt glowed faintly in the moonlight. Iron dust darkened the strange twisting symbols along its edges. The forest around Bone Hollow felt different tonight. Oppressive, heavy, like the trees themselves were watching. Dalton loaded his shotgun. Clara checked the rifle slung across her shoulder. Margaret stood quietly near the edge of the clearing, and I waited in the center of the circle. Because the bait was me. The plan depended on one simple fact. The demon had seen me. It knew I was watching, and creatures like that didn't like witnesses. So we waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. The forest remained silent, too silent. Then the ground shifted slightly, a faint vibration beneath our feet. Clara looked toward Dalton. "That's not the child." Dalton's voice was grim. "I know." The vibration grew stronger. Something deep underground was moving. Something massive. Margaret whispered the words none of us wanted to hear. "The parent is waking up." Then a branch snapped in the darkness. Everyone turned. At the far edge of the clearing, the child demon stepped into view. It was bigger now. Much bigger. At least 9 feet tall. Its body had grown thicker. More bones were visible beneath its gray skin, some too large to belong to a human. Its head tilted slowly when it saw me standing in the circle. Recognizing me, remembering, the creature began to move forward. Slow, careful, studying the ground. It was intelligent. Too intelligent. It stopped just outside the edge of the salt. Dalton whispered from behind the trees. "Come on." The creature lowered its head slightly. Then it did something none of us expected. It smiled.
A horrible stretch of bone teeth. Then it stepped sideways, walking around the circle. Not into it, around it. Clara's voice trembled. "It knows." The creature stopped again. Then it spoke. Not with words, but with sound. A horrible grinding noise deep in its throat, like bones crushing together. And then it did something worse. It turned away from the trap and began walking toward the town. Dalton swore under his breath. "It's going back to feed." Margaret's voice shook. "If it grows any larger, she won't be able to hold the parent down anymore." I looked toward the dark road leading back to Black Hollow. The creature was already disappearing between the trees, heading straight toward the houses, toward the people who hadn't managed to escape, toward fresh bones. Dalton grabbed his shotgun. "We're not letting it reach the town." But deep beneath our feet, the ground trembled again. And somewhere far below the forest, something enormous cracked stone apart. The original demon was beginning to break free.
Part 9. The child demon moved through the trees with terrifying speed.
Within seconds, it had already reached the road that led back to Black Hollow. Dalton didn't hesitate. "Move!" he shouted. We ran after it. Branches whipped past us as we pushed through the forest. The ground under our feet felt unstable now, trembling every few seconds with dull underground shocks. Each tremor felt deeper than the last. Something huge was shifting beneath the earth. Something imprisoned for 40 years. And the child demon was feeding it. We burst out of the forest onto the road just in time to see the creature reach the edge of town. The streets were dark, empty. Most of the remaining residents had locked themselves inside their homes, but a few porch lights still glowed faintly. The demon stopped at the center of the street. It lifted its head slowly, listening. Then it turned toward the nearest house. Dalton raised his shotgun. "Hey!" The shout echoed through the street. The creature froze. Its head twisted slowly toward us. Moonlight revealed how much larger it had grown. New bones pressed visibly beneath its stretched gray skin. Ribs, spines, arm bones, even a skull partially embedded in its shoulder like armor. The monster tilted its head again when it saw me. Recognition, then hunger. It began walking toward us, slow, confident, like it knew we couldn't stop it. Dalton fired. The shotgun blast exploded through the night. The creature jerked backward slightly as the pellets struck its chest. But it didn't fall. It barely even reacted. Instead, it looked down at the wound, then back at Dalton, almost curious. The hole in its chest began to close slowly as the bones beneath shifted and reassembled. Clara fired next. The rifle round hit the creature's shoulder. A piece of bone snapped outward, but the creature only stepped forward again, unbothered, unstoppable. Dalton lowered the empty shotgun. "Well," he muttered, "that didn't work." The demon took another step toward us, then another. The distance between us shrank quickly. 20 feet, 15, 10. Then the ground shook violently. A deep thunder rolled beneath the street. The asphalt cracked with a sharp splitting sound. Everyone froze, even the creature. Another tremor followed. Stronger. The road buckled. A long fracture split open across the pavement. Dust and dirt burst upward from the widening crack. Then came the sound.
A colossal cracking noise from deep below the earth, like stone breaking under enormous pressure. Margaret's voice trembled. "It's breaking through." Dalton turned toward the forest. "How long?" Margaret whispered the answer. "Minutes." The child demon suddenly moved again, but not toward us. It turned toward the fracture in the road, toward the widening crack, toward the place where something enormous was pushing upward from underground. The creature knelt beside the break in the asphalt and waited, like a servant waiting for its master. The crack widened further. Chunks of pavement collapsed inward. A blast of foul air rushed upward from the darkness below. The smell was unbearable. Rotting earth, ancient decay, something that had been sealed away far too long. Then a massive shape began rising through the hole. At first, only bone fragments appeared, huge pieces, too large to belong to any human. Then long skeletal fingers pushed upward through the broken ground, each finger thicker than a man's arm, clawed, ancient. The street exploded apart as the creature beneath forced itself upward. Dust filled the air. Dalton grabbed my arm. "We need to run." But I couldn't move, because I was watching the thing emerge from the earth. The original demon. It was enormous, at least 20 feet tall. Its body was a grotesque structure of bones from countless victims fused together into a towering skeleton-like frame. Skulls, ribs, spines, thousands of bones layered over one another beneath pale, stretched skin. And its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. The child demon lowered its head as the larger creature rose from the broken street, a gesture of obedience.
The parent had awakened, and now both of them stood in the center of Black Hollow, together. The larger demon slowly lifted its head and looked toward the town, toward the houses, toward the people still hiding inside. Then its mouth opened, rows of massive bone teeth grinding together. The sound echoed through the silent streets. A hunger that had waited 40 years was finally free, and this time, there was nothing left to stop it.
Part 10. For a moment, no one moved. The two creatures stood in the center of Black Hollow like something pulled out of a nightmare that had finally become real. The smaller demon, its body assembled from the bones it had stolen, remained kneeling beside the shattered road. The larger one towered above it. The parent. 40 years buried beneath Bone Hollow had not weakened it. If anything, the creature looked stronger, more complete. Its towering frame was constructed from thousands of bones fused together into a grotesque skeleton beneath pale, stretched skin. Entire rib cages formed parts of its chest. Skulls were embedded along its spine like armor. And its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, ancient, hungry, watching. Then it moved. The massive creature stepped forward, and the ground shook beneath its weight. Each movement produced a horrible grinding noise as bones inside its body shifted against one another. The sound echoed through the silent town. Dalton whispered beside me, "Dear God." The parent demon slowly turned its head toward the houses lining the street. It could smell them, the people hiding inside. Living flesh, living bones. And after 40 years of starvation, the hunger was unbearable. The creature took another step toward the nearest house. The smaller demon rose immediately and followed, like a loyal animal walking beside its master. Dalton grabbed my arm. "We can't let them reach those houses." Clara looked at him like he had gone insane. "You saw that thing. We can't stop it." Dalton's voice hardened. "We don't have to stop both." His eyes turned toward the smaller demon, the child. I understood instantly. If the child died, maybe the parent would weaken. Maybe the connection feeding it would break. Maybe. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the only one we had. Dalton reloaded his shotgun. Clara chambered another round in her rifle. "Where?" she asked. Dalton pointed back toward the forest. "The trap. The circle in Bone Hollow. If we could lure the smaller demon into it, the ritual might still weaken it enough to kill. But first we had to separate the two creatures, and that meant getting their attention." Dalton stepped forward into the street. He raised the shotgun and fired directly at the larger demon. The blast echoed across town. The creature stopped. Slowly, its massive head turned toward us. For a moment, it simply stared. Then it roared.
The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard. Not an animal scream, not a human voice, but a deep, grinding roar like mountains collapsing. Windows shattered along the street. The smaller demon turned towards us as well, its eyes locked on me again. Recognition, hatred, and hunger. Dalton shouted, "Run!" We ran, back toward the forest. Behind us, the ground thundered as both demons began moving. The smaller one was fast, faster than any human, but it wasn't the only thing chasing us. The parent demon followed as well, each step shaking the ground, each roar splitting the night air. Branches snapped and trees cracked as the massive creature pushed through the forest behind us. We burst into the clearing at Bone Hollow. The ritual circle still glowed faintly in the moonlight. Salt, iron, ancient symbols carved into the earth. Dalton pointed. "Inside the circle." I ran straight through it. The others followed. Then we turned and waited. Seconds later, the smaller demon burst into the clearing. It slowed immediately when it saw the circle. It remembered. It knew the trap. The creature stopped just outside the edge of the salt. Its head tilted slowly. Then it looked past us, toward the forest behind, because the parent demon was arriving.
The ground shook violently as the enormous creature pushed through the trees and stepped into the clearing. The air filled with dust and broken branches. The child demon stepped aside immediately, making space, respecting its master. The parent demon lowered its massive head, studying the circle, studying us. Margaret suddenly stepped forward. Her voice shook but remained strong. "You remember this place?" The demon's glowing eyes fixed on her. "You were buried here." For a moment the creature remained completely still. Then it took a step forward, toward the circle. The ground trembled beneath its weight. Dalton whispered, "No, not the big one." But the parent demon kept moving. Another step. Another. Its massive foot crossed the edge of the salt, and immediately the symbols began to glow. The creature froze. A deep, grinding sound rose from inside its body. Margaret shouted, "Now!" Dalton fired the shotgun again. Clara fired her rifle. The bullets struck the child demon as it stood beside its parent. For the first time, it screamed. The sound was high and sharp. The ritual circle was affecting both creatures, weakening them. Dalton fired again.
The child demon staggered backward. Clara's neck shot shattered part of its shoulder. Bones spilled from its body onto the ground. The creature shrieked again. Then it tried to run, but the glowing circle held it in place. The bones forming its body began collapsing inward, breaking apart, falling to the ground one by one. The creature thrashed violently as its stolen skeleton disintegrated. Then, with one final horrible crack, the child demon collapsed completely. A pile of broken bones scattered across the salt. Silence fell over the clearing. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the parent demon moved again. Slowly, its massive head turned downward toward the remains of its child. The glowing symbols around it flickered weakly. The connection feeding its strength had been severed. The creature let out a long, terrible roar that echoed through the forest. A roar of rage, of hunger, of loss. Then the ground beneath it began collapsing. The weakened earth around the ritual pit gave way. Stone and dirt crumbled beneath the creature's enormous weight. The parent demon tried to step backward, but the circle held it long enough. The ground split open. The massive creature sank into the collapsing cavern beneath Bone Hollow, still roaring, still reaching upward with enormous skeletal hands. Then the earth closed over it again. Dust filled the clearing. The forest went silent, and the demon was buried once more. Dawn arrived slowly over Black Hollow. The town was half empty now. Many houses stood abandoned, but the screams had stopped. The bones were no longer breaking. Sheriff Dalton stood beside the collapsed ground at Bone Hollow. "We bought time," he said quietly. Margaret nodded. "Yes, but not forever." Dalton looked at the sealed pit. "How long this time?" Margaret stared into the forest. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Until something hungry finds bones again." And deep beneath Bone Hollow, far below the sealed earth, something ancient still moved in the darkness. Waiting, hungry, listening for the sound of bones.